a todos.
Good afternoon,
Disculpen los
everybody.
minutos de demora. Bienvenidos
My
a este
apologies for the
curso
delay.
avanzado sobre compras
Welcome to
gubernamentales
this
para funcionarios de
advanced
los
course
países
on
de la Comunidad
procurement,
Andina. En el
specially
día de
designed
hoy
for the
vamos a
Andean
dar
community.
comienzo a la primera
Today,
sesión,
we're
pero
going
antes
to
de eso
start the
queremos
first
dar unas
session, but
breves
before,
palabras de bienvenida a cargo de las
we would
autoridades
like
de los
to
organismos
welcome all of you,
organizadores. Le damos la
the
palabra en primer lugar al doctor
people
Diego
responsible of the
Caicedo,
organization
secretario
are
general de
going
la
to
Secretaría
just
de la
say a few
Comunidad
words. We're
Andina.
going
Adelante,
to
doctor Caicedo, por
introduce
favor.
Dr. Caicedo first, who's the Secretary
Muy buenos días
General
con
of
todos,
the Andean
con
community.
todos y todas. Quiero dar un saludo especial a la directora del Instituto de Integración de América
Good
Latina
morning, everybody.
y
I would
Caribe,
like
señora Ana
to
Vasco,
present
a la
my
señora
salute
Verónica
to
Fuscani, representante del
Ana
INTAL,
Vasco,
a los
to
representantes de
Verónica,
Procurement,
representative
autoridades de
of
promoción de
INTAL,
exportaciones, del
and the
campo,
representatives
del
of the
Viceministerio de
Andean
Comercio Exterior e
community
Integración de
dealing with
Bolivia,
exports,
ProColombia, ProEcuador y ProMerú,
Pro-Colombia
a los
Ministry of
expositores de esta
Bolivia,
importante
the
jornada,
different
Robert
speakers of
Anderson de la
this
Universidad de Nottingham de
significant,
Reino Unido, y a los
exemplary
expertos internacionales
meeting,
Antonella
and
Salgueiro,
also
Gabriela
the
Lesinski,
international
la
experts,
Secretaría
Robert
General de Orden
Anson
Andina saluda
and
el desarrollo
Antonella
de este curso
Salgueiro.
avanzado sobre compras gubernamentales y
We are
promoción para
so
los países de la OCDE
happy
Andina,
to be
dirigido a
a
funcionarios
member
públicos de
of
los ministerios
this
de Comercio, Economía,
endeavor.
agencias de promoción
And
y
we are
otros
here
sectores de
with
Bolivia,
agencies of
Colombia, Ecuador y
promotion
Perú,
and
el cual se
sectors
enmarca
involved
además en el
in
plan de trabajo
Bolivia,
del Comité Andino de
Colombia,
Autoridades de Promoción de
Ecuador, and
Exportaciones
Peru.
y que en
This
esta
has to do
sesión
with the
cuenta con el
promotion
apoyo
of
del INTAL.
exports, and
Este
this
curso
has
tiene
the
como objetivo
support
fortalecer
of
las
IDB
capacidades en temas
INTAL.
fundamentales como las
We want
compras
to
públicas,
strengthen
en aspectos que
certain
van desde la
central
adquisición de
issues
bienes y
like
servicios
public
para
procurement
instituciones
and the sale of
gubernamentales
goods and
hasta la
services
planificación estratégica
by
de
the
proyectos de
organization of
infraestructura y servicios
governmental
esenciales.
agencies
Se
and the
trata de
provision
inversión
of goods
pública,
and services.
representan una actividad estratégica,
Public
la cual conjuga
procurement
elementos
is a
tecnológicos,
strategic issue
sociales, comerciales y
added or
ambientales, impulsando la
involving
incorporación de
technological,
sectores
social,
sociales
and
vulnerables
environmental
como
sectors,
herramienta de desarrollo.
and with the inclusion of
Asimismo, los
vulnerable
procesos
social
de compras
sectors.
públicas brindan
Public
oportunidades a las
procurement
pequeñas y medianas
means an
empresas, así
opportunity
como a los
for
vendedores locales. Esto
SMBs,
contribuye a la
and this
generación de empleo
contributes
y
to
al
the
crecimiento
generation of
sostenible de las
employment and the
comunidades.
sustainable growth
Consideramos
of
necesario impulsar
communities.
programas para que las
We
pymes
want to
puedan
promote
desarrollar sus
programs
capacidades
so that
y competir en los procesos
SMBs
de compra
may
pública,
develop their
participando de
capacities
manera más
and
activa del proceso exportador.
apply public
Además de
procurement
estar
and
sujetos a las
to
leyes nacionales
participate
en
in the
materia de compras
export
públicas,
efforts.
algunos de los países
Public
andinos estamos
procurement
en
in some
gestión de
of the
apuntar
Andean
a diversos
communities
marcos normativos a nivel
comply with
regional
the
y
rules and
multilateral que
regulations and
entiendan la
standards in this
sistematización de
field.
los procesos
And
de
we
compras,
want to
mejorar la transparencia e
systematize
implementar
procurement
innovaciones
to
a través de acuerdos,
better
modelos, grupos de trabajo
transparency
e
and
iniciativas
efficiency through
bilaterales de
different
cooperación.
models and
Mayor
through
ejemplo para los
efficiency.
países andinos es contar
For
con
the
un
Andean
instrumento marco
communities,
en algún momento vinculante sobre
this
compras
is a
públicas. Desde
framework.
nuestro organismo apoyaremos
And
los esfuerzos que se
in
realicen
our
en ese sentido.
organization, we are going to
Les
support
agradezco su
all the
atención y auguro el
efforts.
mayor de los
Thank you
éxitos
for
en
your
el detalle
attention,
y un productivo
and let me
intercambio de
hope for the
experiencias sobre la
success
importancia de
of
compras
this
gubernamentales en el
opportunity, and
desarrollo
let me
económico y
stress the
social. Muy buenos
significance
días.
of public procurement in
Muchas
our
gracias, doctor Caicedo,
activities.
por sus
Thank
palabras.
you, Dr.
Le damos la
Caicedo, for
palabra
your
ahora
kind
a la
words.
señora Ana
Now we're
Vasco,
going to give the
directora del
floor
Instituto
to
para la Integración de América
Dr.
Latina y el
Ana
Caribe
Vasco,
del
who's the
Banco
head
Interamericano
of
de Desarrollo.
IDB
Adelante, Ana.
INTAL.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Verónica.
Thank you,
Muy buenos días
Veronica.
a todos y a todas. Es
Good
para mí
morning,
un gran
everybody.
placer,
It's
un
an
gran honor
honor for
poder
me
participar de la bienvenida
to
de este curso
participate in the
en un tema tan,
welcoming, in
tan
the
relevante
opening
para la región y en
of this
particular para la
course,
comunidad
because this is a
andina.
subject which
Así
is
que también
crucial to
quería
the
agradecerle
region and the Andean
públicamente
community. I
al doctor
want to
Diego Caicedo
thank
por habernos dado
especially
la
Dr.
oportunidad
Caicedo
de
for having
organizar este
given us
curso
the
de
opportunity
manera
to organize this
conjunta y por
course
supuesto también estar
jointly. And
presente
of
un
course,
especialista también de nuestro sector, del sector de
to
integración y
I
comercio,
want to thank
por
the
haberse sumado
specialist
a
of a
esta bienvenida.
sector of
El
INTAL
tema de las compras
for
públicas es un tema
their
sumamente
support.
relevante para
Public
América Latina
procurement
y en
is a
particular en
significant
la
topic
República
in
Argentina.
the region
Nosotros desde el INTAL,
and
para
the
los que no conocen,
Andean
somos una
community.
especie de think tank
INTAL,
que tiene el
which is a
BAC,
sort
el
of
banco
think
y
tank
también
which the
pertenecemos al
bank
sector de
has,
integración y comercio.
and we
Trabajamos
support
con el
the
fortalecimiento del
trade
proceso de integración
and
regional y
integration
también
department.
el
We work in
fortalecimiento
the
de las
sector
políticas
of
comerciales.
integration and
Y queremos
strengthening
decir la
trade
importancia del
policies. We
trabajo
have two
vinculados al
areas of
comercio
work
y el género, el
linked
comercio
to
y ambiente. ¿Cómo podemos hacer para
trade,
generar una
which
matriz
is
productiva
gender and
más
environment, in
sustentable,
order to
exportadora y más
create a
sostenible?
sustainable
Entonces,
development matrix. With this framework, public procurement has a clear, a significant role. We know the state is the main demand, has the main sector in economy, and there is a significant area devoted to public procurement in each of our countries. And in the case of capital goods, the participation of state in purchasing these goods is higher than in other countries, such as, for example, the OECD countries. That's why we believe this sort of harmonizer of the economy. Historically, public procurement has faced challenges, for example, those related to efficiency and its increase associated with different processes of de-acceleration, red tape in the whole of the chain. And sometimes these hurdles are promoted, but they are overcome by digitalization, for example. Transparency has been a key topic also, and the eradication of corruption. That's why a big number of mechanisms have been conceived in order to strengthen transparency by these traditional principles, which are so important. There are others associated with the PPPs, and there are others now that Dr. Caicedo has mentioned specifically, which are associated with environmental and social areas. Public procurement, which is sustainable and contribute to these two areas. This, as you can imagine, is key to the development of our countries, and this means an enormous leap in terms of growth and development with social criteria, for example, considering not only SMBs, but micro businesses, and considering also women-led enterprises. And from the environmental point of view, we have to include those businesses which have in their production lines environmental friendly processes. Sometimes there's lack of political support and lack of coordination between and among the different actors involved associated to the lack of knowledge of these suppliers who can provide their goods and services in a friendly fashion, considering the environment and social aspects. We have to see also the impact of these goods and services, considering cost and benefits. We believe that all this represents a clear opportunity, and the role of the public sector and trainer is key. So training officials is key as well, integrating their skills and their knowledge in order to enrich this area in the region. That's why I congratulate the organizers for having thought about this course. A central point, as Dr. Caicedo has pointed out, is the process of regional integration, which may contribute to strengthen the procedures of public procurement and to transfer knowledge from the good practices and the lessons learned. Having said all this, thank you all of you, and I do hope that you will find in this course new interest, inspiration, new knowledge that may enrich your daily work. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ana, for your words. And now we're going to listen to Cristian Lucenti, who's a senior representative of the IDB in Peru. Thank you, Vero. Welcome. Welcome, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity of participating in the opening session. The Andean community has had a significant role in the strengthening of Andean countries. The Andean community has become an economic and trade actor in the regions with its achievements and considering the priorities the Andean community has. at the moment. We have as a priority free trade, and we have achieved achievements leading to promotion, quality, sanitation, health, public intellectual property, among others. That's why, to me, it is key to stress the importance that the process of integration in the Andean community, which is 54 years old now, and we do hope that this will grow and evolve. Now we face the challenge of public procurement. It's a new area, relative new area in the Andean community, considering its long history, but it has a key role because it generates synergies among the countries, which contribute to the reactivation of the area, especially considering the role of SMBs. The region has thought about regulatory frameworks, electronic, manual, and other initiatives. And during these sessions, the key actors have worked in public procurement and are going to work in this course. And that means that we're going to expand our knowledge in terms of public procurement in order to ensure that these opportunities be accessible, transparent, and sustainable. Let me thank you for your participation, and I would like to say again to thank the IDB Trade and Innovation efforts, who we believe is an ally because they believe that trade is a tool to improve the lives of all the citizens in the region. Thank you. Thank you, Krista. With these words, we end the opening session. We want to thank.
Y vamos a comenzar con la primera sesión del curso. Esta sesión va a estar a cargo de Rob Anderson, Antonella Salgueiro y Gabriel Beschinski.
The session will be in charge of Rob Anderson, Antonella Salgueiro, and Gabriel Belczynski. Robert Anderson is an honorary professor at the School of Law of the University of Nottingham in the UK and is a part-time academic independent consultant in the program of government procurement at the Tor Vergata University in Rome. He also works as an independent consultant in global procurement issues in Florida. Until March 2019, he was senior counselor and team leader for government procurement and competition policy in the Intellectual Property, Government Procurement and Competition Division of the WTO, where he worked for 22 years. Prior to joining the WTO in 1997, Mr. Anderson held various senior positions in the National Competition Agency of Canada. He also holds a J.D. Juris Doctor from Osgoode Hall Law School, from York University in Toronto, a Bachelor of Arts with honors in economics from the University of British Columbia, and executive certificates in economic development and public policy from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Mr. Anderson, welcome, and you have the floor.
So thank you very much, Veronica, for the kind introduction. And I just want to begin by appreciating the introductory remarks. And it's really an honor to be making this presentation for the Andean community countries and with the support of INTAL and IADB. We really appreciate this, myself and my excellent colleague, Antonella Salgueiro. So this is a subject. Antonella, can you show, please, the cover slide for our presentation now? So this is a subject that we've been thinking about and working on for an extended period, and we've given it the title of Understanding the Significance of Public Procurement for Economic and Social Development. because I believe that, at a certain level, everyone believes in the importance of public procurement for economic and social development. Yet, I don't think we're always speaking on the same wavelength about these issues. And so I still believe we can make some progress in terms of understanding the significance of public procurement for economic and social development. In this presentation, we will make the case that to appreciate the importance of public procurement for economic and social development, we have to think of at least three different dimensions. One is what we call the consumption side. That means the goods and services that are being procured, infrastructure, medicines for hospitals, and so forth, and how important they are for economic and social development. The second one, which people often focus on and is tremendously important, concerns the supply side or the production side, and that is specifically the participation by local suppliers and local SMEs in the public procurement activities. And this is equally important. And the third one will be something that has already been mentioned in the introductory remarks, and that is very appropriately, and that is the interface of public procurement with good governance and corruption control and transparency. These are very important topics as well. So on this slide, I've just we've summarized what I've just said. We're going to be starting with the first dimension, which is the importance of is the consumption side, turning to the production side, and then the nexus of public procurement and good governance. Next slide, please, Antonella. Okay, so I begin with the consumption side, and we can go to the next one already. And here, what I want everyone to do is to, recall when we talk about public procurement, and especially in developing economies and societies, think of what is being procured. We are procuring, the government has, and procurement policy plays a vital role in the construction of roads, ports, airports, sewer systems, other public infrastructure. Okay, it also has a vital role in the education sector, construction of schools, creation of universities in many countries, procurement of books, uniforms, computers, laptops, and so forth for the students. All of these things are super important for the youth of our society and for the next generation, and therefore for development. And they all involve, to one degree or another, public procurement. And the last dimension, which I want to single out and will give particular attention to in this presentation and also in the next one, and that is the health service sector. The health service sector depends vitally on public procurement, whether it be the construction of public hospitals, the purchasing of equipment, and the vital and critical subject of making available in a timely way medicines, vaccines for responding to public health needs. So all of these things we sometimes forget are very largely, not entirely, but very largely done through public procurement. And so this is kind of our first point, that we have to realize that in public procurement, it's not just funds, and we shouldn't think of it as funds disappearing into a black hole. It's taxpayers' money, citizens' funds being spent to build the infrastructure, the education facilities, the health and public health facilities and medicines and so forth that enable governments to serve their citizens well, and also to set the stage for future economic growth and development. So next slide, please, Antonella. And I think Antonella, you're going to speak to this slide.
Muchas gracias, Rob. A lo largo de la presentación vamos a ir haciendo una combinación entre Rob y yo, yendo del español
Thank you,
al inglés.
Rob. Along this presentation, we'll switch. I would like to introduce you, Antonella, first, because I didn't have the chance. Would you just give me 1 second? Before Antonella starts speaking, I would like to introduce her. She's a counselor in government procurement, competition, market regulation, and international law. She has an active cooperation with several international agencies and MDBs, including the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the International Trade Center, and the Program for Development of Trade Law of the United States. She forms part of the intellectual property area of the WTO. She also has degrees and studies in international competition and intellectual property. She got a degree with honors at law at the Free Universität from Berlin, Germany. Antonella, you now have the floor. Thank you, Veronica, very much. Continuing with what Robert was mentioning, even if he described large categories of products that are essential for development and the well-being of citizens, there are other categories that are maybe smaller and are bought more frequently by government agencies. These include goods, services, and works. And why are these important? Because of the frequency with which they are purchased. Of course, hospitals, schools are highly important, but their frequency is lower. But when we speak of vehicles, office supplies, fuel, electricity, these are bought more frequently and belong to categories that are also included in the protocols or annexes of international agreements, including chapters for government procurement. It is important to highlight that the frequency of purchase of these products are also a very good example to introduce measures helping promote purchases by smaller groups such as SMEs, micro SMEs, women-led enterprises. Because of their frequency, that means more opportunities to create measures and program adjustments to include these groups in the purchase of these goods. These are also essential to gradually introduce sustainability measures in connection with the environment and society. For example, when we speak of cleaning services, it's easier to introduce measures such as the uniforms are appropriate for the chemical substances used, introducing staff from certain groups, and we'll go deeper into this in the sustainability session, but the frequency of purchase of these goods and services make them easy areas to create integration measures for smaller groups and sustainability.
Very good. So, so all of what we've said now is in relation to what we refer to as the demand or the consumption side of public procurement, and that is to really stress the social and economic and developmental and growth significance for what is being procured. Infrastructure, public health facilities, education facilities. We could have also mentioned defense and policing. These are essential things that make our societies work. And so That leads me to three observations. One is that the efficiency and effectiveness of public procurement and related processes are vital underpinnings for the future development of our societies. Okay, and here I would make a related point, and that is that public spending and the services that are provided through public procurement are particularly important for the less advantaged members of our societies. And I think everyone will appreciate this point. I mean, wealthy citizens in developing and developed economies alike have alternatives to the public provided facilities, whether those are private schools, alternative transportation, private limousines, medical tourism. These are not things that and not services that the less advantaged members of society are able to access. So the public procurement, how we do public procurement, is tremendously important, particularly for the poorer members of our societies, and of course, for the future growth and dynamism of our economies collectively. And the final point is when we really understand the first 2 points, then we realize that the quality and the choice of goods and services being procured really matters. And so it's not just, fortunately in procurement today and over the last 20 years, to a large extent, we've gotten away from the notion, away from placing undue emphasis on lowest price. And I mean, of course, prices and costs are important. We can't forget about those. But we also really need to, if it's new bridges that are being constructed, if it's medicines that are being procured, the quality and the choice of goods and services is of vital importance. And procurement officials have a vital role in this. So in order to really make all of this work, we need to educate and train and support the procurement community. I also think that occasionally senior leaders in our society who have so many responsibilities and are preoccupation with many different things kind of may sometimes unintentionally overlook the importance of the procurement process and the procurement workforce. And so part of what we are saying today is that the procurement workforce deserves support. It needs to be properly remunerated. It needs managerial backup and the support also of senior leaders of society. So Antonella, now we switch to the next side, which is, so now we're coming to the production side. All of what I've said and what Antonella has said up until now, you could say, is kind of a blurb about the importance of public procurement generally for society. We do recognize that what is also very important and many development advocates focus on this, and that is the production side or the supply side, namely facilitating participation by local suppliers in public procurement activities. That's what we'll focus on now. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we need to acknowledge, and we should acknowledge, public procurement is an important potential source of revenue and of growth opportunities for our domestic suppliers. And that includes local SMEs. It definitely can include and should include women-led businesses. Many countries also provide special opportunities for disadvantaged groups with perhaps with disabilities. And what I really want to stress is that procurement can be important for, the growth industries of tomorrow, because government is often the biggest customer, the biggest single customer for individual suppliers, especially in the services sector. So this government procurement is a powerful tool that can be used to provide opportunities to a broader spectrum of society than is often the case. And sadly, and as we've said at the bottom of the page here, much of this potential is untapped. And in particular, and saddens me to say this, women-led businesses are often substantially underrepresented in the public procurement sector. Disadvantaged groups have faced many challenges. So we believe, Antonella and I, based on our research and our work in different countries, that a lot can be done to realize the potential of the public procurement sector as a source of revenues and growth opportunities for these different groups. Next slide, please.
And before continuing with the following, speaking about SMEs, we also include in SMEs, as Bob pointed out, women-led businesses or women-owned businesses, the groups with disadvantages, for example, businesses led by retired people, and other groups who have fewer opportunities to participate in the public procurement processes. So public procurement may be used to give an opportunity to all these groups. When we speak about SMEs, we believe that they are the backbone, the drive of the economy, not only in the Andean community, in the Southern Cone, in Europe and Asia. Practically 99%, some indicators say 99.5, indicate that SMBs integrate this. More than 50% of employment, formal employment, is generated by SMBs, and they generate a great share of GDP.
Lo cual da a entender que las pymes son un gran elemento de la economía. Y si bien las pymes participan en procesos de compra
Hence,
pública, participan activamente,
SMBs
no
are
obstante,
a
el valor de los
capital
contratos
actor in the
a
economy.
pymes es
Nevertheless,
aproximadamente
the
del 8
contracts
hasta el 10%
they
del
enter
monto
into is
adjudicado
practically
total al año.
8 to
Entonces, si bien
10%
son
of the
varias pymes, son
total
un número importante
amount
de la
involved in the
economía que
contracts.
forman parte, los
So,
contratos adjudicados a pymes, sin
contracts
embargo, son un monto
gained by
mínimo dentro de lo que
SMBs
sería el
are just
porcentaje de
a
contratos
minimum in the
adjudicados a distintas empresas.
percentage, the
Y
whole
esto se debe
percentage of
a
contracts.
varias barreras. Barreras que
Why?
seguro que van a
Because of
acompañarnos acá,
several
porque son barreras
barriers,
que se presentan no solamente en
which are
países en vías de desarrollo, sino que
erected
también se
not only
presentan en
in
países
developing
industrializados
countries, but
y que son los que
also
más se
in
trabajan
industrialized
justamente para
countries
generar la inclusión de las pymes y también de los otros
where
grupos en
SMBs and
procesos de
other
compras públicas.
groups are
Al hablar de estas
incorporated
barreras,
into this
también nos
process.
referimos,
When
por
we
ejemplo,
speak
a la
about these barriers,
información insuficiente
we
para
speak
acceder
about
a las oportunidades de
insufficient
negocio a través de compras
information to
públicas,
access
el valor
business
de los
opportunities through
llamados
public
montos muy grandes,
procurement.
lo cual hace que la capacidad de las pymes no
The
sea suficiente para acceder o para
size of
participar
the
a estos contratos
contract,
porque no les da la
sometimes
capacidad para
contracts are
hacerlo.
so big that
La
these
burocracia
SMBs
excesiva
cannot access, they
de
cannot
repente en los
provide
procesos de participación, la
their
cantidad
goods
de
or
papeleos,
services,
de trámites que se necesitan para poder
bureaucracy,
llegar inclusive a
paperwork,
presentar recién
red tape.
lo que sería presentarse a la licitación. Esto a su vez genera también
And
cierta
all this
limitación en la
generates
experiencia de la
limits.
participación en
So
contratos, lo cual hace que, bueno,
experience is limited in the bidding process.
Otra de
And
las
this means another
limitaciones también está
barrier.
relacionada a los requerimientos o certificaciones que piden. Por ejemplo, en el caso de
Certification requirements
licitaciones, suelen pedir
in certain bidding
ambientales,
processes, for example, environmental certification, something we're going to deal with in the third session of the course. And these certification requirements do not have to mean an impossible obstacle to overcome. Another barrier, finance, the technical or the financial, for example, certain insurance processes. All these barriers generate obstacles, but they are not impossible to overcome. They can be tackled one by one. And now Rob is going to tell us how we can do away with bureaucracy, for example, with all administrative steps being shorter, certain clauses in the contract dealing with, for example, funds, and the international agreements signed in terms of public procurement. So, Rob, your turn now.
Thank you, Antonella. So indeed, just as there are many barriers to effective participation by SMEs in the public procurement sector, but there are also many opportunities and many things we can do to address those barriers and to increase and facilitate access to public procurement activities by SMEs, by women-owned businesses, by businesses representing other disadvantaged groups. And several of them are listed here, and these actually follow very directly from the list of barriers that Antonella presented. So we need to, for example, increase access to public procurement information via open data systems. This is something that in most countries are already working on to one degree or another, but it definitely holds tremendous potential to enhance transparency and thereby to facilitate participation by a broader range of suppliers. We need to and we should ensure that businesses have adequate access to adequate financing to participate in public procurement activities. A third very simple one, but it's sometimes neglected, and that is to ensure prompt payments to qualifying small businesses when they do participate in public procurement activities. It's surprising, and this is a problem in developed countries as well, but small businesses can be acutely dependent on those contract payments. So we as procuring entities need to ensure that they receive their payments promptly. Reliance on the capacities of other entities. We can, for example, we should enshrine proportionality in our selection criteria. What does that mean? It means that we should, our selection criteria that we use in choosing suppliers that we're going to deal with should not be unduly onerous. They should not be disproportionate to what the selected suppliers are going to be asked to do. We can, I won't read out every single one here on this page, but it's always good to encourage performance-based or functional specifications, which provides an opportunity for new suppliers, which helps new suppliers to come into the market. Provide all potential bidders with clear tender documentation, provide technical assistance and training services to SMEs. and other disadvantaged groups. And generally engage in public communication activities and strategies to ensure awareness by the SMEs of the procuring opportunities. And the more we can announce information in advance, the better. This enables smaller businesses who need time to react to plan, to become aware that certain opportunities are coming down the road, and to organize themselves to make effective bids. Next slide, please, Antonella. So definitely, and this is a continuation of the list of different ways that we can leverage and facilitate the participation of SMEs in public procurement activities. Definitely, we should avoid excessive reliance on lowest price as the award criterion. And this we should do anyway, but it certainly also is something that can be helpful to SMEs if we avoid this. We should encourage bid splitting into smaller value contracts where this is appropriate and where this is not precluded by international trade agreements or other legal considerations. We should promote the use of framework agreements that make it easier for SMEs to become, placed on a list of recognized suppliers who will then receive calls when goods and services are needed. We should encourage participation of SMEs as subcontractors. E-procurement, as I've already mentioned, is a very powerful tool for getting the information that SMEs need to the SMEs. And it also enhances the efficiency of our procurement processes overall. Encourage large authorities and central government to buy from SMEs. There's nothing wrong with this, making this a specific strategic commitment of the government, and promote sectoral competitiveness, collect feedback, and so forth. So these are all. And one thing I really want to stress is that we have most of these things, and I know this is a concern that sometimes people have. Most of these things can be done and do not involve any kind of conflict with international trade agreements. Most of these things are in the purview of governments to do by themselves. And next slide, please, Antonella.
Yes. Solo para complementar lo que acabó de decir Rob.
I would just like to add that these barriers impact SMEs, but also they may impact other bidders that have the necessary capacity to bid for the state, but don't have the necessary capacity to participate in these processes. So when we establish these mechanisms that Rob has just mentioned to lift the barriers and cover more participants, this will ensure a higher participation in the public market, not only by SMEs, but bidders in general. And this leads to greater competition and increases the possibility of getting value for money from public procurement. Rob, over to you again.
Yes, thank you, Antonella. And so I'm going to come back now to this point about international trade agreements, because I do know that people have concerns about this. But what I want to make clear is that international trade agreements that cover government procurement do not have to limit potential benefits for SMEs. And there are actually several reasons for this when we think carefully about this. And the first is that market opening under international trade agreements, and especially in the area of public procurement, is really focused very much on the higher value large public contracts. And this is, and these are these are largely out of reach of domestic SMEs in any case. So these are the really high value, whether it's the giant bridges or power facilities. These are the things that we're dependent on large suppliers to provide anyway. And it's really important to have an open supply network and to have competition from multiple suppliers for these contracts. And they don't displace domestic SMEs because domestic SMEs typically don't have the capacity to actually fulfill those contracts. But the vast majority, and just to be more clear, and Antonella is going to give us a slide in just a moment on the thresholds that typically apply in government procurement chapters concerning in international trade agreements. But the critical point is for you to know that all such agreements contain thresholds and procurement, and which are intended to make clear that the international trade commitments only apply to the higher value procurements, and are not and do not apply to the procurements that are below those thresholds. Thresholds are really important, and a large amount of what we can call policy space is open to governments, even when they enter into these trade agreements, to apply and provide special benefits to their SME sectors in respect of the below threshold procurements. Okay, it's also worth pointing out that as niche players, SMEs can and do win public contracts abroad, either alone or as a group in a joint venture, for example. Procuring entities can, again, subject to the details of the agreements, they can and should consider breaking up large contracts into smaller lots. And we also should not neglect the role of SMEs as subcontractors and suppliers to the larger enterprises that will be involved in carrying out those high value contracts. In my experience working in different countries is that even when large international engineering companies, let's say, win a contract in a local market, they very typically will enter into subcontracts with local suppliers. They will hire local labor, with some exceptions, to carry out those contracts. So there's a lot of scope for SMEs and women-owned businesses and other suppliers to enjoy benefits, even when a country enters into an international trade agreement on these points. Antonella, I think you're going to just show them the page on the, yes.
Recalcando justamente lo mencionado recién por Rob, los acuerdos internacionales.
In line with what Bob had just said, international trade agreements include threshold values that are many times based on the GPA, and these thresholds correspond to very high values or high values. Therefore, contracts that are not suitable for SMEs. These thresholds also allow for certain flexibility to develop national policies, including SMEs, because as they don't generate contracts under these thresholds, the state, without going against international agreements, introduce some flexibility, such as a price preference program for SMEs, or some kind of compensation. They may reserve some contracts for special groups, and All these issues, when we speak of international agreements, are a large no-no because we look for market opening, but this flexibility allowed by these thresholds allow for smaller contracts for the development and participation of SMEs in certain types of special contracts. These values have been established as SDRs in general. SDRs are a special basket created by the IMF that groups 5 different currencies, creating a sort of original reserve. It's a mixture in simple language between the dollar, the euro, the yen, the Chinese currency, and the British pound, and the pound sterling. And this can be exchanged to dollars. So, as we see at the bottom, for central entities, Annex 1, ministries, government agencies, it applies, international agreements provisions apply to contracts above 172,000 contracts, and this can apply to, this may seem small for hospitals or highways, but for other specialized SME services do apply, including certain flexibility. It's also important to note that generally for very large contracts, such as infrastructure construction, in developing countries, the creation of certain consortia is common between foreign companies and national companies. Whether they are or not part of an agreement, we have this level of opening in the market for companies they want to participate in national markets, and these consortia can also generate additional opportunities for SMEs or mini SMEs to create private contracts by subcontracting. This is one of the forms we would like to highlight, that in spite of being part of an international trade agreement, including provisions that may involve limitations, there are ways to introduce flexibility to include SMEs in public procurement.
So we turn now to the third dimension that we wanted to cover in this presentation. And remember, the overall topic is the importance and significance of public procurement for economic and social development. Within that, I proposed that we consider 3 different dimensions. The first was the consumption side, which looks at, what is being procured and how important that is for future growth of our national economies, for the well-being of citizens. The second is the production dimension. That's what we've just been speaking of now, and looking at the different ways in which public procurement activities can provide benefits and provide growth opportunities for SMEs, women-owned businesses, and so forth. And the third element or dimension that I want to talk about now is the connection or the interface or the nexus of public procurement and good governance. And this is something that was already referred to by our opening speakers, and really deserves a lot of attention. Next slide, please. So what we have to acknowledge here, it's something that I think all of us logged on for this program know, that public procurement is a danger zone for corrupt practices. And this is, and as such, and corruption is now widely acknowledged to be a primary barrier to successful development. This was not always the case, by the way. When I first joined the WTO more than 25 years ago, people were reluctant to talk about the subject of corruption. I think actually a lot of progress has been made in the sense that we're more willing to discuss this openly now. And indeed, in the work, not just of the World Trade Organization, but the World Bank, the United Nations, certainly I know the IADB, and organizations like Transparency International, all of these now are acknowledging that corruption is a primary barrier to development and that the public procurement sector is especially vulnerable in this regard. And why is the public procurement sector so vulnerable? Well, it's because of the size of this sector, its proportion as a percentage of GDP, the scope and scale of the funds involved, and the fact that procurement involves an interaction between public and private sector actors. All of these things make the prevention of corruption in public procurement a primary concern for all of us present in this webinar and for international multilateral development banks and for the integrity of public administration generally. Next slide, please, Antonella. Okay, and just as one important example of many that we could cite, the importance of public procurement and the need to prevent corruption in public procurement is stressed in the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. This is often referred to as UNCAC. I'm sure that many present are aware of this, and it has a whole article devoted to the prevention of corrupt practices in public procurement. And the contents of that article, I won't read them out, really are very consistent with the recommendations concerning good procurement practice that you will find, for example, in guidelines of the MDBs, you'll find in the WTO government procurement agreement. They involve things like transparency, taking care in selection procedures, establishing adequate domestic review systems, and so forth. So, Antonella, I think you're covering the next slide, yes?
Sí, gracias, Rob. Justamente, volviendo un poco a lo que mencionó Rob acerca
Going
de
back
incentivos y
to
condiciones
what
que facilitan
has
la
just been
corrupción pública en
said,
las compras públicas.
incentives which facilitate corruption in
Este
public
mercado es un
procurement
mercado bastante
markets.
sensible en el
This
sentido de
market
que
is quite sensitive
es un posible caldo de cultivo de la
because it may
corrupción,
be
ya que
a
presenta
starter
ciertas
culture of
condiciones
corruption
favorables a
because it
actos de
presents some
corrupción.
conditions which
Entre ellos son
propitiate corruption.
las grandes sumas de dinero
The big
involucradas en
amounts of
contratos
money
gubernamentales,
involved
el
in
poder
public
discrecional
procurement,
que tienen las
the
autoridades
discretionary
para
power of officials
revisar los procesos de contratación.
to review
¿A qué me
the
refiero con los
procurement
poderes
processes.
discrecionales? Puede ser, por
What
ejemplo,
do I
si
mean when I
una
say
contratación necesita
discretionary
evaluar el
powers?
cargo para
I
cierta
mean
compra, en vez de
that
realizarlo a través de un proceso competitivo,
instead of using,
las
for example, a
autoridades
competitive bid,
en
officials
convenio o por
may
cierta
opt
influencia que tienen, pueden decidir,
just
no, en
because
vez
they
de hacer
work
proceso
with
competitivo,
upon
queremos
or
hacerlo
below certain
directamente
influence, and the
con
certain
una
influence
compra
they
directa,
choose to
justificándolo por
buy
algún
direct,
motivo que puede ser o
justifying,
no realmente un motivo válido. Y
and
esto
this
hablo de los motivos
justification may be true
justamente que
or
poder
legitimate
discrecional que
or not.
tienen
So
y que también es
this
importante
discretionary
limitar a
power
veces a través de las regulaciones,
has
es
to
algo que
be
también puede
limited,
generar
may be
ciertas
limited through
condiciones que
regulations in
llevan a
order
la
to
corrupción
facilitate
en el
certain
mercado de compras públicas.
conditions.
Pero no es solamente el
But
lado del sector público.
it's not
También las
only
empresas
the public
privadas, en el
side,
afán de llevar
private
a cabo el
enterprises,
proceso
in order
estatal y
to
ganar estos contratos de grandes sumas de
be the
dinero,
winners and
también
to
pueden ser
get
los
big amounts of
propulsores de
money,
generar
may
ciertos
be the
incentivos
ones
y de
which
tirar la
propend,
primera,
which
vamos a decir,
foster,
la primera piedra
which
para generar
provide
justamente
incentives to
estas
generate
relaciones de corrupción que se suelen dar en el
these
mercado. Otra
corruption
condición que suele
relationships
también
in the
facilitar la
market.
corrupción es
Another
justamente el
thing
contexto político, económico del
is
país.
the
Hay
political
jurisdicciones
economic
donde
context
de
in a
repente la
country.
cultura de corrupción
Sometimes
está
there
ya muy
is a
arraigada a los
culture of
situación, en el sentido de que
corruption,
no
which
de
is
repente cierto
deeply rooted
incentivo
in the
para
country. So
empresarios.
if there are no
Y es duro
incentives,
decirlo, pero pasa,
changes are
pasa
not
en estas
introduced.
posiciones donde
It's very
realmente el
hard to
turismo,
admit
a
that, but
pesar
it
de ser que
does
está mal,
occur.
llega a ser la norma. Y por último,
Despite it
otras
is
situaciones
wrong,
que
it
también
is the rule.
generan estos niveles de corrupción es que de repente las medidas de
And
transparencia
sometimes
no
transparency
están muy
measures
bien establecidas en los países, o bien de
are
repente los
not well
ejercicios para
designed
monitorear la corrupción por parte de
in
la
order to
agencia tampoco no es
monitor
algo que es
corruption.
muy establecido o muy implementado, lo cual también asimismo
So
genera
there's
que
not a
estas
strong
situaciones de
implementation
corrupción no
of these
puedan llevarse a
practices,
cabo sin
and
que haya
hence
sanciones muy fuertes o
corruption
sin
may
que haya
flourish
procesos que investiguen las distintas
without the
actividades.
existence of processes
Y
which
esto lleva a a los altos costos de
survey or
investigación,
which
que son los
investigate
costos que son los que terminan
these
pagando
processes.
la
And
sociedad en general
this
y los
ends
ciudadanos
up
con los
in the
impuestos que
cost
están
of
pagando.
corruption and
Coincido.
the taxes that citizens have to pay. Your mic, Mr. Robertson, your mic, please.
Thank you. So talking about the costs of corruption, these really have several dimensions. And certainly corruption increases the cost of public procurement projects and drains public funds, making it, meaning that the governments cannot get the same level of goods and services as ideally they could. It involves the squandering of public resources. It skews public investment decisions. It undermines the effectiveness of procurement systems. It discourages foreign investment. And again, without reading out every element on this page, let's focus on the one at the bottom. It makes it harder, corruption makes it harder for SMEs and women-owned businesses and new entrepreneurs generally to participate in public procurement activities. So, corrupt practices typically will involve an element of cronyism. This involves favoring of existing suppliers. And so by definition, barriers get erected that make it harder for new entrants to come into the market. But I don't want to depress everyone. So let's take note that the costs of corruption are extensive and heavy. But let's now proceed to the next slide where we talk about things that can be done to actually enhance the integrity of procurement processes. And there are lots of things to be done. And I'm sure that in the Andean community countries, you're already working on some of these things, but more can always be done. And, what is needed? Well, civil service regulation, codes of conduct are very important. Integrity pacts, this means when the suppliers who are participating in a public procurement activity will commit themselves in advance to avoid certain corrupt practices and to always engage with a high level of transparency and integrity. An interesting thing, Antonella and I work a lot also on the competition dimension of public procurement. And here I will mention public procurement. Just as I said, it's intrinsically vulnerable to corruption, but it's also intrinsically vulnerable to collusive practices by the participating firms. Another word for this is bid rigging. And bid rigging can be done even without the awareness sometimes of the public officials. So this is something that the suppliers themselves can be doing on their own and keeping it secret. This is a very hard problem to deal with, but there are things that can be done. One is this idea of certificates of independent bid preparation. What that means is that each supplier who participates, who puts in a bid on a particular contract, has to sign a statement, and the statement will typically say something like, I am aware that bid rigging or price fixing is prohibited under the laws of my jurisdiction. And in that regard, I have prepared my bid or my proposal on my own and not in coordination with my competitors. This is a very good idea and is increasingly being promoted by public procurement and competition agencies worldwide. Debarment of offending suppliers should certainly be considered. We need to put in place, of course, mechanisms to ensure impartial evaluation of all tenders. And international trade agreements can support that. So effective enforcement institutions, a professional workforce. So the 2 points that I want to conclude this page with are, all of this requires a professional workforce. And I believe, by the way, that in general, public procurement workers are underpaid and under-recognized. And it needs to be recognized that public procurement is a demanding profession. And public procurement workers, officials, need to have proper training. They need to have proper managerial support and guidance, not just be left alone, because it's not good for anyone to be left alone in conducting high-value contracting activities. There must be proper supervision and political leadership as well. Okay, and a final point is that even trade agreements and liberalization can be helpful as well. But can we go to the next slide, please, Antonella? So let's, and again, to make sure we don't get discouraged, there are many things that we can do with our public procurement policies to support good governance and deter corruption. A few of these I've already mentioned, but the simple idea of opening markets is a big step and a very helpful thing to do in terms of preventing patterns and eroding patterns of corruption that may have been present over an extended period. Open markets, that means not imposing unnecessary barriers to participation in individual public procurement activities. These make it more difficult for suppliers to collude. They make it more difficult. They ensure a higher degree of scrutiny of public procurement activities and by a different set of players and thereby help to prevent corruption as well. Bringing, and the same for all of the points here, importance of transparency mechanisms. These are of course vital. I know that everyone is working on those. And a lot, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, IADB has done important work on the use of e-procurement and transparency tools to help to prevent corrupt practices, but also to improve the efficiency of public procurement processes. And another element there in the parentheses on the top right is the role of domestic review bodies. It's very important to have in place an impartial domestic body to review and to hear supplier complaints. So all of these elements are important. Next slide, please, Antonella. And so I think you're going to address this one, which concerns that the role of international trade agreements and how they can help here as well.
Gracias, Rob. Y vemos que en muchos de estos elementos que estamos citando en esta diapositiva,
Many of the elements you can see here reflect some of the measures mentioned by Rob before. So these commitments which you assume when you are a party to an international agreement, generates a certain degree of complexity related to the measures to achieve good governance, efficiency, among others. For example, we see transparency, commitments before and after the call for proposals. Then we have the impact of relevant agreements, the communication, the publication of the winner, and the commitment signed by the winner. We should also count with challenging mechanisms for those who don't win. That is to say, in order to provide input to the monitoring bodies. When we speak about this discretionality of public officials, when they set up the requirements, that degree of discretion has to be limited so as to avoid discrimination favoring one bidder or not. And also, the implementation of e-procurement tools. As you know, it goes beyond, for example, e-auctioning. It has to do with a comprehensive plan and the signing of the contract. So these tools, when they are set, we may have information, good quality data, which will be used to monitor, learn about, and change the system. When there are more bidders, more businesses, there are additional people having a look at the national structure. So the accountability appears, and this is highly significant for civil society and the other bidders. Of course, this is no panacea. There are certain costs that we have to pay when we enter into an agreement, when you sign an agreement, and that is going to be tackled in the third section next week. But although there are costs, there are also benefits, and these openings generates more competition, more integration with foreign players. It generates more players and generates new technology. That means that domestic companies have to improve upon their own technologies in order to compete and provide high quality services in the domestic market. As you can see, this is a virtuous circle which grows and grows and results in a more integrated economy with better quality, more. Now your turn, Rob.
Oh, thank you, Antonella. So we are actually now at the conclusion of our presentation, and what I would like to do, and I'll just end. We have extra slides that we can go to, but I don't want to go there now. I just want to summarize what we've been saying in the course of this presentation. Again, please recall that the overall topic is the importance of public procurement activities and the significance of public procurement activities for economic and social development. And I suggested to you at the outset that there are at least three dimensions that we need to consider here. The first is the demand side or the consumption side, just realizing how central to good government and to the well-being of our citizens are the goods and services that are being procured. And so the more we can improve, when we improve our procurement processes, we're not just doing something for which we deserve a pat on the back, although I do believe we do deserve that, but we're also making it possible to give better treatment to our citizens in their hospitals, and a better future for our students and the younger members of society, and better growth prospects for our whole economies. And recall also what I said, that these matters, the goods and services that are provided through public procurement, are especially important for the less advantaged members of our society. So the basic aspect of public procurement and providing high quality goods and services to our citizens is tremendously important for the well-being of society. Number two is the production side. And there we spoke at length about the opportunities that can be made available to local suppliers through participation in public procurement activities. And recall also, we said, Antonella and myself, we said that there's a huge amount of potential here, much of which we believe is untapped. And we do believe that a lot can be done to facilitate participation by women-owned businesses, by local SMEs, by other disadvantaged groups of suppliers, to participate successfully in public procurement activities. And the final dimension is the nexus of public procurement and good governance. And I know it's something that all persons who work in the field of public procurement are aware of, but it really bears stressing that if we enhance the transparency of our procurement systems, if we develop our procurement workforce, if we work with our supplier community, these things can really go a long way to alleviate practices that otherwise are a serious drain on all our societies. By the way, I want to assure everyone present, this problem of corruption in public procurement is not just a problem in developing economies. It's very much also an issue in developed economies. And with collaboration from Antonella and a couple of other colleagues, we have a book coming out on this topic, and it really shows that issues of corruption and collusion in public procurement are a problem worldwide. So I end by saying this is a really important cluster of issues for all societies to work on, and Veronica, tell me, I think now the professor is going to give some remarks, and we have time for questions and answers, if I'm right. Is that right?
Yes, that's right, Rob. Right now, we will welcome Professor Gabriel Belczynski. I would like to introduce him. Professor Belczynski, he's an economist, researcher of the School of Politics and Governments of the University of San Martin in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He's a teacher and former academic coordinator of the master's degree in government procurement. He's a specialist in public procurement and consultant for governments and international agencies for the evaluation and reform of public procurement systems. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in the session. I would like to point out that Bob's and Antonella's presentation has been excellent, covering one of the main aspects of the problem connected with public procurement. I will make some remarks on the topics already discussed and on part of my experience working in Latin America public procurement systems some years ago, which may shed some light on some of the aspects discussed in these presentations specific to the region that may be interesting to highlight. First of all, the first aspect presented by Bob and Antonella is very important. The analysis of what governments are purchasing. Everybody who works in public procurement is highly concerned about what states procure and how states can make procurement more efficient, more transparent, to combat corruption. But we don't focus so much on what is procured. And I think it's a relevant question because there are some important changes in this respect in recent decades. There's been an increase in the composition of services in state contracts and procurement, including integral solutions, including goods, as well as works and services. So there's a trend already seen to procure integral elements instead of splitting up goods or services or works. And this is an aspect I think we should consider because it also reflects a change in the composition of production of goods and services in general on the international arena, not just in connection with public procurement, but also it reflects a change in the composition of international production as to what is understood by goods or by services or works. So there are also borders between these categories that are becoming blurred, and this is reflected in state procurement as well. And there's an aspect I would like to highlight briefly because it will be developed in other session, which is sustainable public procurement. And this is important because this area in which the role of the state may be more important than in the rest of public procurement in general. Because we all know that there are many markets for sustainable goods and services that have already been developed to a large extent, but many others have not been well developed, especially in Latin American countries. If the state is going to contract goods and services or works under sustainability criteria, it may not find adequate supply in the local markets. So the role of the state in that case is also a role to create markets. And this requires considering special issues as to how the state will approach these contracts and what knowledge is necessary of the market to approach sustainable procurement.
Bueno, y después otro tema muy relevante de la presentación
Another
es
important
el
issue
tema de la oferta,
discussed
digamos,
in this presentation
si bien
is the
mencionaron
supply
varios,
side. You
varios
mentioned
tipos de oferentes
several
comerciales,
types of
centraron
potential
el énfasis
suppliers,
en las
but
pequeñas y medianas empresas.
you focused on SMEs.
Yo ahí quisiera hacer
On that
una
point,
diferenciación que creo que es
I would like
importante,
to make a
porque en la
differentiation
región
that I think
solemos
it's
hablar
important because in the
del
region,
universo de las
we normally
pequeñas y
speak
medianas
of the
empresas.
universe of
Antonella, por ejemplo,
micro, small, and
mostraba algunas
medium-sized
estadísticas
enterprises.
mostrando que
Antonella
el
showed
99%
statistics showing that
de los
99%
países
of
de la región son
enterprises in the region's
pequeñas y
countries
medianas
are
empresas.
micro, small, or
Eh,
medium-sized
Sin embargo,
businesses.
es un universo muy
However,
amplio y muy
this
heterogéneo.
universe
O sea, no
is quite
podemos tratar
broad
a todos
and
en de la
heterogeneous.
misma
We
manera.
cannot
Y ahí
treat
tenemos desde
treat
microempresas, que
all
son
these businesses
empresas
the
de tres
same.
o cuatro
Some of these
personas, digamos,
businesses
que a
include
veces
just
están,
3 or 4 people
se dedican
who
a la
sometimes
artesanía, digamos, o a
do
actividades que son
craftsmanship or
prácticamente de
conduct
subsistencia, hasta medianas empresas
subsistence activities. And we also
tecnológicas
have
con capacidades
medium-sized
tecnológicas
companies
muy desarrolladas que pueden incluso
dedicated to
exportar
technology or
a mercados, a
including
países
technology that can
desarrollados,
export
¿no? O sea, es un
to
universo muy
developed
heterogéneo
countries. So
y
the
es
universe
importante
is quite
diferenciar bien
heterogeneous, and it's
porque
very important to make a
yo he tenido
differentiation between these because
oportunidad
I've had
de
the
ver en
opportunity
países de la
to
región
see in many
que
Latin American countries
por no hacer bien esa diferenciación,
that the
se
lack of
terminan
this
diseñando
differentiation leads
procesos de
to the
contratación
design
para
of
favorecer
procurement processes
la
to
participación
favor
de
the participation
proveedores locales, por
of
ejemplo,
local
muy
suppliers,
interesante que ustedes
which is
mencionaron en la presentación,
a significant topic you
pero
mentioned
resulta que
in
esos
your
proveedores
presentation.
locales de
But
alimentos, por
then
ejemplo,
these local,
no
for example,
tienen
food suppliers don't
licitación
have,
formalizado, digamos. Esa es una
are
característica
not formally
muy
established, for
importante, digamos,
instance,
en la
which is a
región,
very
que hay una
important
alta
characteristic
informalidad,
in our
digamos,
region. Informal work and
economías,
employment is very high in our
sobre todo en el
economies,
segmento de las
especially in
microempresas.
the area of micro enterprises.
Entonces, ese tipo de iniciativas
So
tienen más
these
que ver con la
initiatives
política
are
social y
more
con la
related
política de
to social
desarrollo
policy
productivo
than
de
to
un país, a
productive
exponer
development
que
policy
las compras, contrataciones públicas pueden
Mhm.
of the
pueden aportar.
country to which public
Em,
procurement
y por supuesto, como
can
decía,
help.
después hay otros segmentos
And there are other
de
segments as
pequeñas
well,
o de medianas empresas que
including
tienen
small or
capacidades
medium-sized enterprises
inferiores
that
a
have
este nivel, digamos,
higher
de microempresas
capacities
prácticamente
than
subsistencia
micro
que sí se pueden
enterprises. And
desarrollar
these
programas más
larger
ambiciosos
enterprises can
de
develop
contratación de
more ambitious
proveedores
programs
al mercado de contratación pública.
to be hired or to be incorporated to the public
Bueno,
procurement
creo que hicieron
market.
una excelente revisión de cuáles son las barreras que enfrentan estas empresas
You made a wonderful presentation
para
about the
participar en el
barriers
mercado de
that
contratación
are
pública
erected
y de
in the
las
market of public
acciones
procurement
que pueden
and the
implementar
different actions that
para,
may be implemented
para superar esas barreras, para
to
eliminarlas, si es posible, o para
destroy
reducirlas
or
lo máximo
reduce
posible.
those barriers.
Bueno, y sobre todo de las barreras que tienen que ver con las acciones que puede
I
implementar el
especially
propio
refer
sistema de
to
contratación
the
pública,
barriers that
por ejemplo,
may
la
be
simplificación
erected by the system
de la
itself, for
normativa, la
example,
simplificación de los
dealing with
requisitos,
regulations
bueno, el hecho
and
de
other type of
que ustedes
requirements.
resaltaron, por ejemplo,
You underscored, for example, the incorporation of technology in the different processes of procurement facilitate not only the access of SMEs to access public information, but also their participation in different processes, because now in many processes, in many countries, the processes are entirely electronic, and you don't have to go to a public agency in order to submit your proposal, as it was done before. Registers requirements imposed on the businesses are also different. Sometimes in the past, the same information had to be presented in 20 different agencies if they wanted to participate in 20 bids. But now, with the electronic register, facilitates, as I said, the access of businesses to the market. But let me point out that there are other barriers which have nothing to do with public procurement, but they are related to the features of SMBs as economic agents, or the features of the market in which they work. For example, the lack of scale in production, or the lack of certification, for example, quality certification. Or other typical features of SMBs in Latin American countries, which is how difficult it is for them to access loans, for example, or insurance, bonds, for example. All these barriers are significant, and the public procurement system may implement actions, but it has to work together with the private sector in order to eliminate or reduce those barriers. Guarantees, for example, there are some countries in the region which have a system which has been especially designed for SMBs to allow for their participation in public procurement. Another thing is facilitating access to credit thanks to subsidies, public programs. Public banks or private banks may offer credit to SMBs. And there are other solutions which have been implemented in the countries in the region, which are interesting. For example, the factory system, working hand in hand with the banking system. So if a small business is granted a contract, it may resort to the bank and obtain the fund they need previously. So there are mechanisms that have to be developed to eliminate or reduce those barriers which are erected against SMBs. Another thing I would like to say is that these systems, public systems, have to work together in order to strengthen the capabilities of SMBs. I'm referring to innovation. In most of the countries in the region, the
específicas
different
que
states
trabajan con las
have
pymes en
specific
distintos temas,
agencies
temas de
which
calidad,
work
temas
with
de control,
SMBs in terms of
y
quality
creo
and
que no están
innovation,
suficientemente coordinadas
but they
con las
lack
áreas de contratación pública
coordination with the different
y
areas of public
entonces
procurement.
caminan, digamos, por dos carriles
Hence,
separados, ¿no? Y es
they
necesario coordinar
work
los
or
esfuerzos
they go along
entre
different roads.
las
That's
temas de
why
contratación
the
pública,
different
básicamente
efforts
los
have
entes
to be
rectores de los
coordinated.
sistemas de contratación pública de los países y las áreas de producción,
I refer to the
ciencia,
different
tecnología
agencies and the
y
production
gobierno
areas
que
and the
pueden apoyar
technology
en
agencies
lograr los
in order
estándares de
to
calidad
add
o
efforts, and
innovación
that is going to
requeridas
result
para
in
participar
higher standards
en
of
los
quality,
procesos de contratación.
and SMBs are going to be able to participate in more processes or bidding processes.
Bueno, el otro tema importante que tocaron en la presentación es el tema de
Another
la
point
gobernanza y
which
del
should be
control y la lucha
underlined
contra la
is
corrupción,
governance
clave
and the fight against corruption,
en la contratación pública.
which is
Como bien
key in
dijeron,
public procurement.
la contratación pública es uno de los, no es el
Public
único, pero es
procurement
uno
is
de los
not only
canales
the only one, but
a
it's
través
one
de los
of the
cuales
channels through which
se canaliza, se llevan a cabo estos actos de corrupción o prácticas mal
corruption
habidas.
actions
Y
are
entonces es muy importante
made.
que los sistemas de contratación pública tengan
So public procurement systems
los instrumentos y las herramientas
should
necesarias
have
para
the instruments, the
mejor
tools
control de la
in
corrupción.
order to
Obviamente,
control
ustedes
or
hicieron una
to
excelente
check
revisión, digamos, de
corruption
cuáles son los
better.
riesgos de la
You
corrupción
made a
en la
presentation of the
contratación
risks
pública y cuáles son las
associated with
herramientas
corruption and
que se pueden
the
utilizar para
tools
controlar
that may be
o
used in order
minimizar
to
estos riesgos
minimize
de
those
corrupción y
risks,
cómo los acuerdos internacionales
and how
permiten
international
desarrollar
agreements
al interior de los
allow
países
for
esas
the
herramientas y
domestic
esos
development of
mecanismos.
those tools and
Yo
mechanisms.
simplemente quisiera comentar un poco la experiencia en América Latina
Now
sobre ese
I would like
tema,
to
que,
speak
bueno,
about the experience
una
in Latin
región
America.
lamentablemente bastante
Unfortunately,
tiene una reputación bastante negativa
the
en
region
términos
has
de
a rather
corrupción
negative
a nivel internacional.
reputation at international
Y
level.
entonces, dada esa característica, digamos, y los altos niveles de corrupción que se registraban en el
Given
Estado,
the
en los
high
países y en las
degrees of
relaciones públicas en
corruption which
particular,
existed in the
se
states and in
implementaron
public
hace un
procurement
par de
in
décadas,
particular,
digamos, algunas reformas
2 decades ago, some
en el sistema de
reforms
contratación pública de varios
were
países,
executed in the
buscando
systems of several countries in the region,
establecer mayores controles
aiming at
para
achieving
limitar
a higher
los riesgos de
level
corrupción.
of control in order to avoid
Y hay
the
hubo un
risks
estudio, digamos,
associated
que se
with
hizo,
corruption.
creo que hace
And there
unos 10
was
años, más o menos,
a study
de
which
varios países
was
que habían
made
implementado
10 years ago,
reformas
I
en su
think,
sistema de contratación pública, buscando
encompassing several
eh,
countries which had
justamente
implemented reforms
limitar, digamos, los riesgos
to
de
limit
corrupción.
the risks of
Y la conclusión
corruption.
de ese estudio es que se habían impuesto tantos controles
And what about the
a los
conclusion? The
procesos
conclusion
de
was that
contratación pública
so many checks had
que se
been
había logrado
implemented,
el efecto
so many controls
contraproducente,
had
digamos,
been
de
implemented,
paralizar la contratación
that
pública
that resulted
directamente, ¿no?
in
Había
the
tantos
absolute
controles y tanto
paralysis of
temor,
the
digamos, de
system.
los compradores públicos por no incurrir, digamos, en prácticas que pudieran ser
Public procurement officials were so
catalogadas
afraid
como
of
prácticas
making
corruptas
mistakes
que se paralizaron muchos procesos
that
de
many
contratación pública.
processes of public procurement were, as I
Y
said,
eso
paralyzed.
ese enfoque, digamos, de aumentar los controles, digamos, para tratar
This
de frenar el fenómeno
approach
de la corrupción,
resorted to more
reforzó algunas
controls or stronger controls,
de las malas prácticas que
fed
son bastante
back
usuales en los sistemas de
some
contratación pública
of the
en los países
practices
de la
which are
región,
so usual
como por
in
ejemplo
the countries in the region.
el criterio de
Let me give you an
adjudicar
example.
siempre las licitaciones por menor precio.
To resort to the
Porque hay una idea de
lowest
que
price, for
la buena
example.
norma es
As the rule says,
adjudicar por el menor precio posible, digamos, el principio
or
de
favors the lowest
mayor
price
economía.
possible.
Entonces, muchos compradores públicos
So
piensan
many
que
public
si
procurement
no adjudico por el
officials
menor precio, voy a
believe that
tener
if
una
the
observación del organismo de
lowest
control
price is not
que me va a
chosen,
investigar para ver por
I'm
qué
going to be investigated by a
hice eso
regulatory
cuando
agency
debería haber
because
adjudicado
they want
el
to
menor
know
precio.
why
Eso,
I chose A when I
si
should
bien se
have
está
chosen B.
permitiendo ahora en algunos países
Although
que
this
están
is
incorporando explícitamente en
gradually
su
changing
normativa
because the
la
standards
posibilidad
have
de
started
el
to
principio del valor por el dinero
include that the
y
value for
habilitan a los
money
compradores públicos a
is
adjudicar
not the only one,
criterios
and
distintos del precio y en muchos
public
casos también
officials
eso
may resort to
obligan
other
a
criteria other than price, and
tener en cuenta
sometimes
otros criterios
they are
además
even,
del precio.
it is mandatory to
Todavía
take into
sigue
account
existiendo en la región esa cultura,
other
digamos, medio
features other
arraigada
than price.
de
But that culture
adjudicar
of the
siempre
lowest price is so
a la
rooted
oferta de menor precio por esta idea, digamos, de que si no, no lo hago de esa forma, entonces
because,
los
as
organismos
I
de control me
said,
van
the
a
idea is
investigar
that
por
regulatory agencies may investigate officials if they don't choose
y
the lowest price.
bueno, y otra mala práctica, digamos, que reforzó esta idea de mayor control sobre los compradores públicos
And another
es
practice
la
that
falta
affected
de
public
contacto con el
officials
mercado.
is the lack of contact with
En
the
muchas de las
market.
legislaciones de los países de la región está prohibido que los compradores
In
públicos
many
tengan contacto con los
legislatures in the
proveedores,
region, public
lo cual es
procurers
una
cannot
pésima idea
contact or
porque
know the
justamente un
suppliers.
comprador público
That
tiene
is
que
a
conocer el mercado antes
terrible idea
de
because
ponerle
officials
marcha a
have
un
to
proceso de
know the
contratación,
market
tiene que saber, digamos,
in order
cuáles
to
son los bienes y
start a
servicios
process
que
of
requieren los proveedores,
procurement.
si las tienen,
They have to know the
cuáles son los rangos de
providers,
precio,
their
qué
features,
innovaciones hay
the
en el mercado,
price
tiene que estar muy
ranges.
familiarizado con
The
el
officials have
mercado
to be
antes
familiarized with the
hacer,
market
de diseñar incluso un proceso de
before
licitación,
designing a bidding
pero
process.
esta cultura del control y esta prohibición,
But
digamos, del
this culture of
contacto
the
con los
control and
potenciales proveedores
banning
como un
officials from
posible
contacted
indicio de
probable
corrupción,
suppliers,
lleva a
but
que en
it may
muchos
be
casos
considered as a vice
los
in the
compradores
process.
no tengan conocimiento o no tengan el conocimiento suficiente del
That
mercado y
results
eso lleva muchas
in
veces
an
a que se
imperfect
hagan
knowledge of the
contrataciones
market
fallidas o
and
contrataciones
thus
que
imperfect
se terminen
bidding
contratando bienes
processes.
o servicios que no eran los que se
And in the end,
requerían
goods and services are
etcétera.
hired and are not
Em,
the
y
best.
quisiera mencionar dos experiencias que creo que son importantes,
And I would like to mention
obviamente para
two
sumar a los
examples
mecanismos que
which may
Robert
be
y Antonella mencionaron como
considered,
posibles
taking into account what
mecanismos
Robert
para
and Antonella
controlar
have
y
already
evitar los riesgos de
presented.
corrupción, que son un adecuado monitoreo de los procesos de contratación pública
Adequate monitoring of public procurement
por parte
processes
del órgano gestor
by
de la contratación
the
puede ser un
agency
mecanismo para
that
detectar
controls
a tiempo y
the
prevenir
issue. This may
posibles casos de corrupción.
detect
Por ejemplo,
and
un
prevent
caso interesante que me
corruption. An
tocó
interesting
analizar hace unos años
case
es el de
I had
Chilecompra,
to analyze some years ago is Chile
que
Compra, Chile
cumple
Compra, Chile buying in
para
Chile.
poder hacer esto hay que tener un buen sistema
Now, to do this,
de
you need a
información,
good
digamos,
information
de la
system
contratación pública.
about
Chile lo
public
tiene,
procurement. Chile has one.
pero además de que lo tiene, lo utiliza bien, porque hace un
And
monitoreo
Chile
permanente
also
de las
uses it
contrataciones
very well because
públicas
it
de los distintos
monitors
organismos del
public
Estado,
procurement
va
all the
evaluando
time by the
las
different state
los distintos
agencies.
tipos de
It
bienes y servicios que
assesses the
compran,
different types of goods and
si se
services that are
repiten los
purchased,
proveedores,
whether suppliers repeat
cada cuánto
themselves,
hacen
I mean,
las
unrepeated,
licitaciones y va
the
indicando si hay
periodicity of
algún
call
indicio,
for
digamos,
bids,
si
and
algún
they find out and they
desvío que
detect
pueda indicar
suggestions of
que hay
deviations
alguna
that may indicate some
operación
kind of
sospechosa, digamos. Eh, y
suspect
entonces
operation.
hacen las consultas,
In that case, they
hacen las
raise
notificaciones si es
questions,
necesario,
they
y
conduct
eso funciona
investigations if necessary,
realmente
and
bien como
this
un mecanismo de
works very
prevención y
well
alerta
as
temprana
a
de
prevention and early
posibles
warning
casos de corrupción.
mechanisms to avoid
Y otro aspecto
corruption.
importante
Another
que creo
important
que
aspect,
todavía necesita mucho desarrollo en los países
I
de la región,
think
aunque hay algunos
it
países que ya
requires
lo tienen
large
y
development still in the
aplican
region, although some countries do have
bastante, que es la
do
participación,
have
promover
it,
la participación de la
is
sociedad civil
promoting the
en los
participation of
procesos de
civil
contratación.
society in public
Eh,
procurement processes.
para eso, obviamente,
For
también es
this,
importante tener
it's also
buena
important
información,
to have good information, good quality
hacer pública la
information,
información, porque también
to
hay que decir esto,
publicize information,
hoy en
because
día hay muchos países, la
today
mayoría de los países ya tienen
most
sistemas
countries
electrónicos
already have electronic
de
systems
contratación.
for public procurement.
En muchos casos ya son
In many
sistemas
cases,
transaccionales,
these are
donde
even
todo el
transactional
procedimiento de contratación,
systems,
como decía
while
Antonella,
the whole
desde
contracting process,
el
as Antonella
requerimiento
mentioned, from
hasta
the
la
requirements
finalización del
to
contrato, se hacen de
contract
forma electrónica a través de una plataforma
completion
y ahí queda
is
todo
done
registrado,
electronically on a
lo que
platform,
pasó
and
a lo largo
everything
del
is
proceso.
recorded there. I mean, what
Eh,
happened throughout the
muchos
process.
países ya tienen esos
Many countries
sistemas
already
y tienen
have
muchos
these
datos
systems in
sobre el
place and
proceso de
have many
contratación, pero no
data
tienen información.
on public procurement
Hay una
processes,
gran
but they don't
diferencia
have
entre
the
tener datos y
information.
tener
I mean, the
información.
difference between having data and having
Entonces,
information.
bueno, tener información
So,
que sirve no
having
solo para
information is useful
utilizarla
not only to
en forma estratégica, digamos, para
use
el
it
análisis
strategically
del desarrollo del sistema de contratación pública
for an
y promover
analysis
las
of the
mejoras
development of the
necesarias.
public procurement
El
processes
ejemplo que dimos recién
and
de Chile Compra
promote
es
any
uno,
necessary
pero hay otros
improvements, as the
sistemas de
case of Chile,
contratación
and there are other
trabajan de la
systems in the
manera.
region that
Y también
work
es
in the
fundamental tener
same way.
información
And
para
it's also
proveer
essential to have information
al público, a la ciudadanía, a la sociedad
to
civil, para que
give
se
the public
involucre
and the civil society
activamente
so that
en
they
los
can
procesos
have
de
an active
contratación pública.
participation in these processes.
Hay casos de algunos países, bueno, el propio Chile, por ejemplo, tiene
Chile, for example,
una instancia
also
institucionalizada, digamos, de participación
has
de la
an
sociedad civil a través
institutionalized possibility of
de un
civil society participation
organismo que se llama,
through an agency called,
bueno, ahora se me fue el nombre,
I'm
pero es
sorry, I can't remember the exact name now, but
cuerpo, digamos, que funciona en el
it's
marco de Chile
an
Compra, donde tiene representantes
agency
de distintas
inside
organizaciones de la
Chile
sociedad civil
Compra,
que se reúnen
including representatives
regularmente y
of the
analizan
civil
la situación
society that meet regularly and
pública,
analyze the
eh,
status of public procurement processes
emiten informes
that
sobre
are
la
ongoing.
transparencia del
They issue
sistema,
reports on system
los
transparency,
resultados que se obtienen.
on the results
Eh,
obtained.
Hay otros países como México, por
Other
ejemplo, que
countries,
tienen
such as
una
Mexico,
figura
have
institucionalizada que es,
an
se llama el
institution
código social, que es
or a legal
una figura que permite la
concept, which is the
participación
social
de,
witness. It's called
organizaciones de la
social
sociedad
witness.
civil como
It allows for the participation of civil society organization as auditors in public procurement processes. And this organization
gracias, Antonella, es el COSOC, efectivamente, el Consejo de la Sociedad Civil.
the Council of Civil Society, Council of Civil Society from Chile. So the social witness in Mexico participates throughout the contracting procedure and monitors for the process to comply with the provisions, regulations, and that no illicit practices are conducted. And there are other mechanisms that favor the participation of civil society too, that are very important and can be used as a barrier against corruption. Finally, I would also like to highlight another topic that Robert and Antonella mentioned in their presentation is the issue of the professional development of public procurement workers or employees. I also have the experience of having designed, implemented, and managed for 10 years a master's degree program on public procurement here at the University of San Martin. Hundreds of public procurement workers from different countries in the region attended this program. There are many from the Andean community, for instance, from Ecuador and Peru. So the professional development of public procuring individuals is very important. There's no formal study called public procurement, for instance. In general, these workers come from other disciplines, lawyers, engineers, and they learn to conduct public procurement as they work. And so the professionalization of these individuals is missing. We designed this master's program at the request of the directors of public procurement agencies in Latin American countries who saw the difficulty of not having enough professionals. My last point is the description of some experiences connected with the analysis of the participation of Latin American suppliers in public procurement in other countries in the region. One of the goals of education is to promote the participation of suppliers from the Andean community in the markets of other members of the community. The experience shows that this participation in the region is highly limited. Some years ago, we conducted a study for Chile. Chile is one of the countries that is highly open, and it has
para
been that way
promover
for
la
many years in the
participación de
region,
empresas
to
extranjeras
describe the
en los
participation of
procesos de
foreign
contratación pública
companies
de Chile.
in public
Y
procurement
ahí descubrimos que era muy
processes in
bajo,
this country. And we
contrariamente a lo
found
que
out that the level of participation was very low,
podíamos haber esperado.
contrary to our
Em,
expectations.
Eso no quiere decir que
This doesn't
empresas
mean
extranjeras,
that foreign
digamos,
companies
no chilenas, digamos, de otros países, no participaran en la
did
contratación
not
pública
participate
de
in
Chile, sino
Chilean
que
public
las que no
procurement,
participaban
but that
eran
those that
empresas extranjeras
participated
que estaban
were
radicadas en Chile,
companies
que tenían
that had
filiales o
local
oficinas
branches in Chile.
en
They had
Chile,
branches, offices in the country,
pero no había participación de
but
empresas
there
que no
was no
estuvieran radicadas
participation
en el
from
país.
foreign companies
Y lo
that
mismo
didn't have
descubrimos
branches or
ahora,
offices in Chile.
el año
And
pasado,
we've discovered the
en un
same
estudio
last year in a study we
y
conducted
ahora estamos terminando, supongo
that
que se
we
publicará
are
en breve,
finalizing
para la
now, soon
Alianza
to
del
be
Pacífico,
published for the Pacific Alliance,
que integran algunos de los países
formed
que integran la
by
ANDI,
some of the countries that are also members of the Andean
otros
community,
países,
plus other countries.
y descubrimos lo mismo, digamos que
And we
la
found
participación
the
de
same
proveedores
thing, that the
en los países
participation
de la Alianza del
of
Pacífico en los
suppliers
mercados de sus
from the
socios en
Pacific
la Alianza
alliances in the
prácticamente
market
fue
of their
insignificante.
partners in the alliance
No hay
was practically
participación de
non-existent.
proveedores
There was practically no participation of suppliers
los países en los
of the
mercados de
countries
contratación pública
in public
de sus
procurement
socios.
markets in their
A
from their
pesar de que hay
partners.
un acuerdo
Although
de libre
there's an
comercio que
agreement,
facilita
a free
esta
trade agreement,
participación y que tiene un
facilitating
capítulo
this
específico de
participation,
contratación pública
having a specific
que
chapter for public
habilita
procurement
y
that
promueve esta
enables and promotes this participation.
participación. Bueno, y ahí yo diría que hay
On this point, I would say
factores que ayudan a explicar
several
esto.
factors
Bueno, por un lado,
participate.
la
On the
falta de
one hand,
conocimiento y de
lack of
promoción de
knowledge,
las
lack of
oportunidades de
promotion
negocio.
of the business
Creo que
opportunities.
hay que trabajar mucho en eso.
I think a lot of work needs to be done
Hay
on
mucho por
this
hacer ahí.
issue, and there's a lot to be done yet.
Pero también hay algunas barreras
But
para
there are
la
also some
participación que tienen
barriers
que ver con
against participation
cuestiones
connected
de localización.
with, for instance,
Hay algunos tipos de
localization.
actividades, por
There are some
ejemplo,
types
que
of activities
requieren que
that
la empresa esté
require
instalada en el
the
país
company to be
destino,
present,
digamos, en el
be
país que hace la
working
contratación.
in the country, in
Por
the
ejemplo, si se
contracting
trata de la
country.
prestación de un
For
servicio
example,
que
the
requiere
provision of some service
equipamiento
that requires
o
equipment
maquinaria específica
or specific
o
machinery
logística o
or
vehículos
logistics
especiales,
or
etcétera.
special
Bueno, eso
vehicles.
requiere que la empresa esté radicada en el país
For
de
that, the
destino, porque si
company
no, no va a
needs to
poder
be
prestar el
established
servicio.
in the country of destination. Otherwise, it would not be possible for it to provide the service.
Bueno, en el caso de bienes es más fácil,
For goods,
relativamente más
this
fácil,
seems
aunque
to be
ahí
easier. So,
el
although
tema de la escala, bueno, ya
the
Robert
scale is an issue there,
habló
Robert and
sobre el
Antonella
tema de la
have
escala
already
y
discussed
cómo
this in their
eso se puede
presentation, the scale and
suplir
how this can be replaced
a través de fraccionamiento
with the
de las licitaciones,
unitization
por ejemplo,
or
la
the
posibilidad de
splitting
deliveries
up
parciales
of contracts or
o,
the possibility of
o
partial
de
deliveries
la posibilidad de contratar
or contracting
con grupos de empresas y no con empresas
groups of
individuales.
companies instead of individual
Pero
companies.
yo quisiera destacar una
But I would
oportunidad que
like
veo
to
para
highlight an
la
opportunity
participación
I've seen for the
sobre todo pequeñas
participation
empresas.
of especially
Las empresas grandes
small
tienen capacidades
enterprises.
para
Larger enterprises have more capacities
digamos,
to
para enfrentar
face
estas dificultades.
these
Pero
difficulties.
en el caso
But small enterprises
Yo creo que hay
or
un
medium-sized
potencial
enterprises, I
importante
think
en
they
todo
have
lo
an
que son
important
servicios
potential
habilitados
in the area of services
o sustentados en la tecnología. No
based
solo
on
software y
technology,
servicios
not only
informáticos,
software and
sino
IT
también otro tipo de
services,
servicios
but other services
que están habilitados por la tecnología y que pueden ser
based on technology
ofrecidos, digamos,
that can be offered
a distancia.
remotely.
Servicios que tienen que ver con el diseño, con
For example,
desarrollo de
design,
contenidos, con
content development,
servicios profesionales de distintos
professional
tipos.
services of different types.
Ahí, en muchos de los países de la región, hay
Many
desarrollos
countries in the
importantes
region show
de pequeñas y medianas
important
empresas que
development
pueden
of SMEs
perfectamente ser
that
ofrecidos
can be
en
offered
condiciones competitivas a terceros países.
under
Y creo que
competitive
es
conditions to third countries.
un nicho, digamos,
And this is a
interesante para
niche that
explorar
is very
y para
interesting,
promover, digamos, la oferta
where the
de las
offer
pequeñas y medianas empresas
by SMEs can be
las
promoted
contrataciones públicas de
in
terceros
public
países
procurement
socios
in
en
third
los acuerdos
countries that are
de libre
partners
comercio.
in free
Así
trade
que, bueno,
agreements.
estas son algunas reflexiones
So
que
these are my
pueden ir
thoughts.
aportando un poco de mi
These are the thoughts
experiencia
I wanted to share with you
de
based
trabajo en
on
países
my work
anteriores.
experience in the countries in the region in recent years. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Gabriel, for your comments. We will now go over to Rob. Rob, would you like to answer? We have one question now. Or would you like to have a break and then come back? What would you prefer to do?
Thank you, Veronica. So I can quickly respond to very quickly, because I agree with all the points that the professor has made, and quickly respond also to the question. And then maybe we take a 5-minute break, and then we're just going to show 3 or 4 more slides on the COVID-19 aspect that you asked us to do. So so first of all, Professor, thank you very much for your comments, and which I think are very synergistic with ours, and I really appreciate them. And it's very important to have the complementary perspective from the actual region itself. There's too many points in common with what you've said for me to mention here. But just to say, we do agree very strongly about this point about professionalization. And I also want to say, I would agree with your suggestion that, corruption control needs to be done properly, and it needs to be done proportionately. It needs to be done sensibly. It is not fair, and it is not appropriate simply to impose more and more and more and more requirements or scrutiny mechanisms on the procurement officials themselves. This is not a good thing for the procurement system as a whole. We need to view the promotion of integrity in a kind of holistic way, which involves yes, providing proper training and support and managerial support to the procurement officers, yes, but also very much involves working with the supplier community to foster integrity and to make sure we do everything in a proportional kind of way. And remember that procurement is a difficult job, and most of the procurement officers of the many hundreds and thousands of officers that I've met in different classes and so forth are overburdened and undercompensated, and so we need to think of them as friends and as professional officers deserving support. I strongly agree with that. So the both the professor and the question, Veronica, in the that I received in the chat, make this point about the impact of trade agreements on SMEs, and how realistic is it to promote trade in international procurement markets. And I would just like to assure everyone that those are important points, and I take them seriously. And we are not as you made clear, Veronica, at the beginning, I'm not working anymore for the World Trade Organization, neither is Antonella. We're not pushing anyone to enter into a trade agreement that they don't feel ready for. I still believe that trade agreements can be useful to countries in creating new opportunities and also in reinforcing good practices. And ensuring, and in other ways as well. But we will talk about this. Actually, I think that's going to be the third and final session of our series of seminars. So we'll have a whole big discussion on that. But I agree that we need to think carefully about the interests of SMEs and local suppliers when we enter into trade agreements. That's perfectly reasonable. And but I still feel that there are benefits to be achieved if we lay the groundwork properly, if we do the homework, that these can provide important new opportunities as well.
Okay, so let us resume the session with the following presentation. I don't know who is going to start. Okay, come on, Rob.
So thank you. And just for everyone's assurance, this one is much shorter than the previous presentation. So I think we can get through this certainly in 15 minutes. And I think we should try to do that so we can end reasonably on time. And so sorry, just back to the front one just for a sec. So this is what we're trying to do here is to reflect on lessons learned as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and all of the pressures and challenges this posed for public procurement in the time of the pandemic. These also can be very relevant to circumstances of natural disasters. I'm mindful of this because we have hurricanes happening in the Gulf of Mexico near where I normally live in the state of Florida. And now is a time when we have natural disasters happening as a result of climate change and other factors. COVID-19 is, as much as we would like COVID-19 to be completely over, but it's not completely over. There are some signs that it may be coming back. So we believe, just to say, we believe that this topic of challenges for public procurement and lessons to be learned in the context of COVID-19 and natural disasters is an important one for all of us to reflect upon. Now, fortunately, Antonella and I have a short presentation. Now we go to the next one. That summarizes just in 5 or 6 slides the main points that we want to make. So what happens in a time of emergency procurement, or in a time of a natural disaster or a public health disaster, such as the COVID-19 pandemic? We then all are pushed into emergency mode. This is basically what happens. And we have this situation of, congested supply chains that are not working as smoothly as they should, competing public buyers willing to buy potentially at inflated prices. We have often shortages of critical goods. We have lockdowns and travel restrictions. And we also have constraints, the procurement authorities themselves. Let's not forget about them. The officers may, not be allowed to come into their normal workforce. Hi. And so basically, emergency procurement puts even a whole lot more than the normal stress on the procurement workforce and on procurement professionals. Next slide, please. And so, and these problems, by the way, these challenges, they do occur worldwide, and in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, the procurement systems were placed under enormous stress because of COVID-19. Yet I'm conscious that these problems are even more severe in developing countries. And this is, because for many factors, but really I would say the main one is the limited financial and human resources that are typically available, which are even less in developing country contexts. In some cases, relatively limited understanding and public support for open and transparent procurement systems, and lack of well-developed communication channels. All of these are problems. So what I'm saying is a COVID-19 pandemic or a natural disaster, this places enormous stress on any country's procurement system, and these stresses are likely to be more severe in a developing economy context. Next one, please, Antonella. Okay, so what do we expect in terms of emergency procurement? Well, we think it's actually very important to manage expectations, and it's important, and the procurement professionals, to some extent, this is their job to stress that even in the time of emergency, there are still benefits to maintaining a degree of openness and transparency and proper procedures. And something that we've seen again and again, also in the UK, by the way, that was a major example of this. When in a time of emergency, everyone has to move more quickly than usual, and that's excuse me, and that's when money can be misspent. That's when we may take shortcuts. We may have to take shortcuts, but we can also money can be stolen, money can disappear. All of these problems are more severe than in the normal times. And so the way we protect ourselves as procurement officers and officials is to be transparent, to deliver quickly, but maintain high standards of transparency as far as we can. Okay, next slide, please. And so there are ways to minimize risks, and remember always, relevant concerns, the known vulnerability of the public procurement sector to corrupt practices and cartel activity, even in normal times, which then becomes more severe in a time of crisis. The amounts of money that are involved, and indeed, what happened in COVID, what happens in a time, governments rightly step up and make available unprecedented sums of money. And that's good. I mean, we really need them to do that. And yet, with all that money washing through the system, there are the chances of misappropriation of funds, of misallocation of funds are greatly enhanced. And these can create setbacks to the fundamental problem of addressing the public health crisis. I remember in the time of COVID, even in the United States, there was a time when masks just weren't available. And so this is the kind of thing that happens, and everyone was responding to a set of challenges that were beyond people's normal experience. It's a difficult time. So what can we do? Well, I don't think there are any simple or easy answers that solve all the problems. But what we can do is we can raise public awareness. We should try to maintain, whenever we can, a high degree of transparency. We should ensure communication is essential. Communication by procuring entities, by public health leaders, by emergency measures organizations that are charged with responding to the crises, the communication to the public. These organizations must also be communicating with each other. For example, one thing that we think is really important is communication between public procurement agencies and competition authorities. You'll see that mentioned on this slide. And especially in the context of emergency procurements, because that's when companies, suppliers will be tempted to take advantage of the situation. It demands a whole of government approach. So it's the procurement agencies, yes, but it's also the competition agencies. Even the international trade authorities and ministers may need to be involved to ensure access to particular supplies, maybe vaccines and other medicines that are only available internationally. In a time of crisis, we have to think of all of these things all at once. It's immensely difficult. And my bottom line is the one at the bottom of this page, that adequate resourcing for the procurement workforce and adequate managerial and political support are vital. Okay, next slide. And I think we're just about ready to wrap this up. But by the way, I certainly, the electronic tools are very important, but they also are not a panacea. No single thing that we do is going to solve all of our problems. Incidentally, I do agree, and the professor made excellent points about involving civil society, and this is an interesting trend and an important trend that is going on in many countries, including the ones you mentioned, Professor, but others as well. And that's a big part of our solutions. More transparency, more communication, more accountability through open government. Next slide. And so Antonella, were you going to, this is a slide on all the different ways in which e-procurement can help. Did you want to address this?
Yes, gracias, Rob. Sí, justamente justamente recalcar un poco lo que dijiste, que e-procurement no es el uso de las compras
To
públicas
highlight
electrónicas no es una
what
panacea,
you've
no va a
said,
solucionar, pero sí es una
that
herramienta
e-procurement
que
is not
sirve
a
para
panacea,
obtener
it's
no
just a
solamente más
tool
acceso a información, sino también para
helping
obtener
to have
información
more
de buena
access to
calidad,
information
generar
and
datos
to
y
have
conocer los
good
datos
quality
sobre qué se trabajan
information,
ahora
generate
fuera del
data,
sistema.
and
Y como
work
alguien
on
que
those
viene
data to
de
improve the
Latinoamérica,
system.
no solamente el COVID
As
es algo que nos afectó,
somebody
el COVID afectó
who
a todo el
lives or
mundial,
who comes
pero
from
tenemos
Latin America, we
otros
know that
elementos también que pueden
COVID
afectar el sistema de compras públicas,
had
como
a
por ejemplo
global impact.
que
And
ya
we
tenemos
can also have
contaminación de los aires,
other
tenemos otros tipos de
problems with strong
epidemias como
impacts, such as
dengue,
earthquakes in the
tenemos
Andes
epidemias
region,
chikungunya que vienen
other
ya, hay otros
pandemic,
fenómenos
epidemic
meteorológicos como el niño y el
diseases
niña
such
que crean
as
sequía, que
dengue,
crean
other
que no se
phenomena,
inunde inundaciones
Niño,
y todo
Nina,
eso repercute en
generating
la capacidad del
floods.
Estado de comprar los
And
bienes o los
this
servicios
has
que son
an impact on
necesarios
the
para poder
capacity of
justamente
states
no
to
solamente aplacar
procure
los
goods and
efectos de
services to
estos
mitigate
eventos,
the
sino
effects
también
of these
reforzar
events,
la
but
prevención de los
also
efectos de los eventos,
to
en el sentido de, por
reinforce
ejemplo, tener buenos
prevention.
sistemas
For
de
example,
agua,
having good
tener
systems,
buenas calles que no se
drainage
rompan, que
systems,
no se bacheen al
good
momento de tener muchas
streets
lluvias. O
that
sea,
don't
son
break
cuestiones a
up
tener en cuenta porque son
when
cuestiones que
rain
nos
is
afectan, no solamente
abundant.
epidemias
All
COVID, sino
these
también
issues
eventos,
are
desastres naturales
important
y otras epidemias o cuestiones más
to
relacionadas a nuestra zona. En ese
prevent
sentido, volviendo un poco a lo que había
disasters
mencionado sobre el
of
rol de las
different
compras
types.
públicas
So
electrónicas,
this,
tenemos, por ejemplo,
going
lo
back to
que
the
es
role of
OCDS, que
e-procurement,
es
we
el
have
estándar de datos para
OCDS, which
licitaciones
is
abiertas,
the
que también es una herramienta
data
bastante,
standard
bastante
for
ya
open
implementada en varios países de
procurement.
Latinoamérica, que
This has
genera
been
este tipo
implemented
de
in several
información
Latin
para conocer
American
qué es lo que está
countries that
pasando
generate
y
this
cómo
type of
mejorar a
information
través de la
to know
información
what's
que ha
going
sido
on
obtenida.
and how
También tenemos otro
to make
elemento que en las compras
improvements
públicas
based on
electrónicas
this
nos ayuda a
information.
generar
Other aspects
una más
in which
rendición de cuentas
e-procurement
sobre qué está
helps
pasando.
increase
En ese contexto,
accountability.
el rol de las compras
The
públicas
role
electrónicas
of
generan reducir
e-procurement
el nivel de
reduces
contacto entre los oficiales y
contact between
los entes del
procurement
sector público y del sector
officials
privado. Esto no
and
quiere decir
private
que debe
sector
haber un
entities.
corte
This doesn't mean
inminente.
that
Generalmente se debe tener
there should be an
cierta
imminent
comunicación, no solamente en el
cut
momento del
of
procedimiento, sino inclusive
contact.
antes del
There
procedimiento.
is
¿Por
some
qué? Porque
communication during the
es tan
procedure and
importante que
before
los
because
entes
it's
de compras
important
públicas realicen
that
ciertos
pro-
tipos de
procuring
análisis de los
entities
mercados para
carry
ver si
out a
realmente hay la
market
capacidad
analysis to
para
see
producir y
if the
para
market
vender
has the
estos bienes
capacity
y
to
estos
produce and
servicios que
sell
han listado.
these
Entonces,
goods
si bien
and services to the states.
las compras públicas
So
electrónicas
even
pueden
though e-procurement
cortan esta comunicación en el sentido de que hay menos
cut this
interacción por la información,
communication in the
eso
sense
tampoco debería estar
that
cortado
it
de
reduces
absolutamente.
interaction,
Las compras
this
públicas electrónicas también crean, como había dicho,
lower
un sistema
interaction
automatizado que genera
does
un
not disappear
camino
at
o
all. This doesn't
unas
mean that
huellas
interaction will
que se
disappear
fueron
at all.
trabajando anteriormente para justamente crecer
Then to
sobre eso.
create an automated
También
and
ayudan
data-rich audit
a
trail
revisar, también son
to
interesantes en el sentido que pueden generar
trace
ciertos
the
indicios
procedure. This is
cuando hay
interesting
actividades
because it
sospechosas
can
de
generate
fraude, precios excesivos, inclusive corrupción o situaciones aleatorias
elements
que también
that
se
make
pueden
it
trabajar en
rise to
conjunto con la Agencia de
suspicion that
Competencia,
can be
como había
worked
mencionado
on
Rob.
jointly with
Aparte de
the
eso, también
procuring
genera
or
una
competition
imagen en tiempo
entities.
real
It
de qué
also
está pasando, de
generates
cómo
a
la cadena de
real-time
valor se está
image of
moviendo
what
y
is
cómo
going
esto
on, how
afecta
the
también a las
supply
compras
chain is
públicas.
moving, and how
Y este
this
último
impacts
punto,
public
relacionado también a
procurement.
estas
And this
formaciones que
last
tenemos,
point
también recalca un poco lo que había mencionado el
also
profesor Belczynski
highlights
sobre el
what
rol de la
Professor
sociedad
Belczynski
civil, en el
mentioned
sentido de
about
la
the
sociedad
role of
civil
civil
también es
society.
una
Civil
herramienta de
society is
monitoreo
also a
sobre qué
monitoring
está
tool
pasando en las compras
on
públicas.
what is
Y a
going
raíz de
on
toda esta
with
información que se
public
está generando de
procurement.
estos
And
datos,
based
esto
on
también
all of
puede
this
ser
information and data that are
vital
being
para ver
generated,
cómo se
they
está
can
desarrollando el mercado,
be
ver
also a
si hay
sort of
indicios de
watchdog to
corrupción,
see
de precios
what
altos,
the
de
how the
mala
market is
calidad, de
developing and
compras
see whether there are high
innecesarias, un montón
prices,
de cosas que
bad
pueden repercutir,
quality,
como dije,
many
en la
elements
calidad del
that
bienestar
can impact
de los
the
ciudadanos.
quality and well-being of
Y esto, un
citizens.
ejemplo, el profesor Beschinski
One
dio un
example,
ejemplo que fue
Professor
el ejemplo
Beschinski
de Chile
mentioned,
Compra y
a
también
very
el
good
acuerdo de
example, Chile
México.
Compra
Y a esto yo le
and
agrego el
the
ejemplo de
Mexican
Prosorro.
Observatory.
Prosorro
And I would like to add
una entidad
the
de la sociedad
example of
civil de Ucrania que fue creada ya hace
Pozoro.
más de
which is a civil society entity in Ukraine created more than 10 years ago when they were reforming their public procurement system to monitor what's going on the system. And this system was helpful to detect corruption, excessive prices through civil society. And today it is very important too because it has become an instrument to verify contracts that are being conducted in the context of war, although defense contracts normally are out of the are different from general public procurement contracts. Other contracts such as food supply, medication supply that are also needed because of the war, this civil society tool helps the money that is now crucial to develop defense is used for good purposes and is used in a value for money approach. So this is our presentation on the impact of COVID and natural disasters. It's a short presentation, but I think it touched many of these points from a bird's eye view, because all these topics can be discussed for days. You need to see how this can impact public procurement, but there are also many internal aspects involved. What types of procedure to use, whether open procurement or limited, call for bids, and many other aspects relevant when we design and develop public procurement for times of emergency. And now, Rob, you have the floor.
So I understand that the professor has to leave us very shortly. So our presentation on this point is concluded. We can, if the professor wants to make any comments in the short time remaining, this is very welcome.
Sí, gracias. Bueno, lamento, pero
Yes, thank you very much. I'm sorry, but I need to leave because my students are waiting for me.
Pero me pareció también muy
But
interesante esta presentación sobre las
this
lecciones del COVID y
last
quisiera
presentation on
agradecer que
COVID
tuvimos
lessons
también
was very
en
interesting.
América Latina
Here in Latin America, we also conducted a study
la Red Interamericana de Compras
entrusted
Gubernamentales
by the
y
Inter-American Network of
sobre las
Public
lecciones
Procurement and the
aprendidas de la
IDB
pandemia
on
en
lessons
nuestra
learned from the
región y en algunos
pandemic
países de la región.
in
Y las
terms
conclusiones
of
son
the
muy
region's
similares a
public
las que
procurement
ustedes
systems, and the
mencionaron.
conclusions are very
Y
similar to
además
the ones you showed.
identificamos algunos
And we
casos
also
interesantes,
identified
como por
some
ejemplo
interesting cases, such
el hecho de
as
que la pandemia
the fact
había
that the pandemic
obligado a
had
muchos países que estaban
forced many
implementando sus sistemas
countries that were
electrónicos de compras
implementing
a
their
acelerar
e-procurement
su
systems
implementación.
to accelerate
Es
this
un efecto
implementation.
positivo, digamos,
That was a positive effect
de la pandemia.
of the pandemic.
Bueno, hay algunos países que pudieron
Some
manejar la
countries
pandemia con sus marcos
could manage
legales,
the pandemic within
con los
their
marcos
legal
legales que ya tenían. Otros
frameworks.
países tuvieron que hacer reformas
Other
ad
countries
hoc
needed
para,
to implement
para poder
reforms
implementar
in
mecanismos
their legal
más
frameworks
ágiles, digamos, que no les permitían las normas que
to
tenían.
use more agile
Así
mechanisms
que hay una serie
than the ones
de
they had in
conclusiones
place.
que
There
sacan
are
del estudio que están muy en
several
línea con
conclusions
lo que
we've drawn
están diciendo.
from this study
Me
that
alegra
are
mucho
aligned
escucharlas.
with the ones you showed. So I'm very happy to see this coincidence or this alignment. Okay, thank you very much for your participation. I want to thank Gabriel, Rob, and Antonella, and all the participants who joined us today.